All right, so this is the moment where I'm going to hit the tones again, and I invite you to listen deeply, to empty your bowl, surrender to the moment, listen deeply for the words that rises to the top of your awareness, having just heard what we've heard and lived what we've just lived. I submit that there's an inner voice that's ready to talk to you, and it may say some words for you to consider, or it may give you a word, or it may just be in silence. Whatever it is, it's exactly what you need to hear. So I invite you to empty your bowl and listen for the word that comes bubbling up as I hit the tones. And then I'll go around the room in the order I see you. I'll call your name, and you just give us the word, and I'll hit a tone to acknowledge it. And then we will hit the tones again and move into coffee talk. So that's where we are right now, including our guests. You are invited to play along. And if all you want to do is pass, you just say pass when I call your name. Whatever you do will be exactly correct. And again, we won't judge you because we've been in that position too. So listening deeply. Shouldn't long.
Acceptance.
Damien.
Witty.
Joe.
Adaptability.
Greg.
Enough.
Mark.
Adapt.
Artifact. All right, I'll hit the tones one more time. That'll move us into the foyer for coffee talk, in which we can talk about anything we want to talk about. And then we're also free to leave with just a bon voyage whenever the spirit moves you. There, no harm, no foul. Just coffee talk can go as long as it needs to, or till the next thing happens. So this moves us into coffee talk. I'll just get started and just say the experience we have in true story circles is sort of once you leave the true story circle and we kind of take on our life again. That's where we do the things. We talk to each other, we coordinate, we make judgments, we ask questions, we give advice, receive advice when asked from our perspective. The true story experience sort of reinforces forever, though, that whenever you're doing that, you always become mindful that it's always exactly from your point of view. It's only from your point of view. It reminds us about the power of the judgments we make, but also the limitations of living in a single perspective. And so it tends to change the way we ask for advice, what we do with it, and how we give it. Like, you can never lose sight of the fact that I can only tell you what it is from what I know and what I've lived. And then maybe the best way I can give it advice is to tell you a story about this situation that we're in and what happened as truthfully as I can. Sometimes you say, hey, I'm going to be directive here and say, from my point of view, this is the insight that I felt and maybe where it comes. But there's a subtle change I've seen in myself and in others who've reported on it. But what happens to how we engage with others outside of the circle? There's a carryover, a spillover. I know that it's made me a better coach, father, husband, teammate, teacher, trader, because of that deeper sensibility of the social network that we live in and my place in it. And I become much more aware of all of those different roles. You know, when I hear myself speaking which role am I playing when I say that thing in a certain way? What was the drive? Have I really thought my way through that? So it's that's the phenomenology of living in a true story circle, is that it starts affecting you in those ways. You remember that you really don't know all that much about whatever weight the other guy's carrying. Because inevitably when those stories come in, you just get so amazed, and you never would have guessed that that's what they were going to talk about, or that's where it went. And you realize that we really only see the surface of ourselves. And as you discover your own depths that you didn't know, you say, God, here it was. In my naivete, I thought I actually knew something about this other person. I know some things, but have I really, connected at the deep level? And that's where I think Mike is guiding me to think about the spirit knowledge, living in the spirit of body, mind, and heart, and not in the word world, but also in the direct world of spirit. So I got to think more about that and spend time in the true story circle, just emptying my bowl of words and reflecting on the fire that's in there, in the little fire pit. Tending the fire comes out of the Lakota tradition. The spirit guy that you trust to protect you while you're going through it is the fire tender, the one who cares for the fire, that protects you from wild animals, gives you heat while you're doing that inner work and outer work. That they're tending the fire so that you don't have to. And that's kind of the role Mike has voluntarily accepted and that I gratefully receive. So that's what I want to say about that, Aho. So that's the transition into the coffee talk, so we can ask questions, we can talk about things that we wouldn't talk about in the circle. Like, I would have, I felt really, some part of me really wanted to ask Joe if he was familiar with John Malden's essay on the paradox of the heap. You probably, if you're a money guy, John Malden, and you may have come across that essay, which was, I think, the best one he ever wrote.
I've read it 5 times.
Yeah, I read it every year. He's really good. And that, I was aware of the paradox of the heap before he wrote about it. I thought he did a beautiful job connecting it to the world of finance. And in many ways, my ideas on compound critical state addresses the paradox of the heap. And the paradox of the heap is as you drop snowflakes on a mountainside, at some point, the next snowflake triggers the avalanche. But no amount of studying the mountain from a distance allows you to say, the next one is the one that causes the avalanche. And yet avalanches occur. Well, it's the essential unpredictability, which is what Taleb gets to in his idea of the fourth quadrant problem, that these fat tail events happen and no amount of your statistics will give you complete confidence to predict when and where and how big. And that it's the illusion of control is the fourth quadrant problem. Well, I also would say, though, is there's an intermediate position which says you can study snowfall on mountainsides and seasons, and you can say, well, here's when avalanches occur. It turns out that on this mountainside with no snow, there's not going to be an avalanche. Now, there might be a rock slide, but that's an avalanche of a completely separate character because it has to do with earth and dirt, not snow on the mountains. So anyway, so I wanted to talk to you about that. I felt an urge to, but because I was in the True Story Circle, that's one I wanted to talk with you about later, just to confirm. I had the suspicion that you knew of it because of the way you said the phrase. Without saying it, I sort of knew that you'd read that. You know, and I wanted to ask Chunlong Lee what's the symbol of the ETF that he's tracking, so that I can study that too, so I can see what do the critical states in that ETF look like. In other words, when do people who are aware of that strategy suddenly start buying it? What triggers them to do that, and what does that do after it gets in a critical state? Is that a tradable event? In the same way that I study all ETFs. So I wanted to ask you what that symbol was.
Yeah, I'll send you later because I cannot
Yeah, fair enough.
remember that. That's a full letter. I think it's JEPQ, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'll
so
send it you later.
when you get a chance, let me know.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that you end up having to do, and this is my final comment, is that in order to listen deeply in the True Story Circle, you have to actually create a persona inside yourself who is the perfect scribe. And you say, look, I know that there's a part of me that is always going to remember everything that was ever said and which I felt in that moment, and that I can retrieve that later so I don't have to worry about it. I can release that and simply exist in the listening of the truth. So it kind of goes to that big list of things to process later, and that I'm just going to invest that scribe in doing that and trust that that happens in order to quiet my mind, in order to be a deep listener. So it turns out that deep listening is even more fundamental to the truth telling. That there were 6 of us in the room, 5 of us were engaged in deep listening. 1 of us was trying to tell the best story truthfully that we could. You might think that true storytelling is the essential thing. It turns out it's the true story listening that matters in terms of the multiplication of truth in the world. So anyway, aho. And that is officially the last thing I'm going to say. I wanted to...
And I just pop into the chat as the ETF is JEPQ.
JEPQ. Got it. Now, see, he was good enough. See, because I didn't interrupt him to ask him what it was while he was telling his story, that gave the story time to breathe. And I've already violated my not talking anymore, but aho.
But I have a challenge, Ken, and maybe it's out of the scope of today, and you can address it at another time. The first one is finding creativity when you have very little of it. That's number one. And the number 2 thing is, how do you get out of the uh, rut, if I could call it that way, that you're in, to be able to reinvent yourself?
Well, the first thing you do is you dig the rut with your shovel by doing the work, by going through those little brief experiential learning exercises,
Okay.
surrendering to the process, emptying your bowl, and then seeing what comes in. Instead of trying to force it and predict it and plan it and demand it, you simply invite it. And the way that those creative impulses know that you're serious is because they witness that you've done all the prep work, which is you picked up your shovel, you went to the space, you surrendered to the moment, you emptied your bowl, and you've invited it into your bowl, and you patiently wait to see what arrives, if anything. And you accept whatever the results are that time, and it's good enough and complete, and nothing else has to happen. 100% of the time that people do that, they increase their creativity. We measured that at the Command and General Staff College. After a single 2-hour lesson of doing this, the guys were measurably more creative to a scientific Western standard. Fact. And 100% of the people that go through this process so far have eventually just noticed, like, God dang, I didn't even realize it or know it or measure it. I could just, when I do actually reflect on it, it just happens. And what it is doing, according to Fletcher, is it is connecting, it is bypassing that rational brain of yours with the words and the concepts that has to know ahead of time the right answer so that you can give the right answer and pass the test. It's bypassing that and connecting to your biochemical brain, which inherited through DNA the capacity to use stories and words in these processes to experience directly altered states of consciousness and to generate creative impulses that led to the survival of the species. It's remembering our DNA. That's what's going on. And at some point, you have to live it in the same way that Mike Three Bears says, I need to spend time setting aside the words and connecting directly to the fire with my body to integrate with mind and heart, living in the spirit of that fire, which you are already sensing by saying that you were unserious so far. I think you were serious and were doing the work within your capacity, and the fact that you're still here tells me that that's true. But now where you are is, maybe are you judging to say that wasn't enough, or you're saying that same level of effort is not enough for where you are now. And you can say that by forgiving your earlier self. Let that guy be who he was. He was brave enough to try it. So let it be what it was. Just accept that. And commit going forward to whatever level of energy you put into it is what you decided it was going to be. And whatever that was right for you, with no judgment from anybody else, because only you can make that call, and whatever it is going to be right. That's what I'd say.
No, well said.
Part of it is also, I believe, is you're reminding yourself that you have standards that are way up there, and you're just reminding yourself that it's time to start working.
Yeah. Everything you say or don't say, either the noise you make or the silence that you emit, goes out to the edges of the universe for all time and space. The conservation of story, the conservation of energy. So there's a connection between you and what you just did or didn't do. to everything else. My hypothesis is that when we state an intention to have a true story circle, the commitment to do that as best we could, the universe hears that, and the universal ear is listening for the sound of the truth so that it can experience its own truth through the stories that we tell from the point of view that we're in. That the universe has invested in us to be that single point of view that is uniquely us. That is perfect in that universe, that little singularity that we are, is perfect because we are exactly what it is and nothing else. No other point in the universe actually represents exactly that point of view. And so the story that comes out of that can only be truthful. And we have more or less skill, we think, in trying to tell it. But whatever it is that we did, it's like the drum. When you play a drum, you can't play it wrong. You can only play it the way you played it, and whatever it was exactly what you did, and it was perfect in that moment for, to document. That is an artifact for what you were and who you were in that moment, which is why live music has such a quality to it that the best recording can never replicate what it meant to be in that space. Because we only hear the music, we're not seeing the people and all, and how we were feeling, etc. Aho.
As a bystander, what you guys are doing is something very important. When you gave the introduction and you started talking about this course specifically, there was a vibe, seriousness, in the sense where anyone can joke, yeah, but there's this vibe of seriousness where you can feel that there's something important about to take place. And you don't feel that quite often, unless there's something happening between some sort of acceptance, some sort of alignment, some sort of acknowledgement between a group of people into what's about to take place, what's about to happen.
Yeah, I think it speaks to our, living in the spirit in public with others, that there are moments, and then there are moments with a capital M, that we get a sensing at the primal level that something special, a critical state, if you will, where there's more clarity or purity or significance because of the coming together of different forces or conditions or whatever. And, we have those a lot. Sometimes they'll sneak up on you. Other times they happen because you see them coming from a long way. The moment of graduation from a school. I can remember going to summer retreats at monasteries run by monks, and we would meet and whatever, would go through the music and prayers and sports and food and fellowship and talking and silence. And the last time that I went to that, when I was at the age when it was for kids of a certain age, and I knew that was the last time I was ever going to go to there. That really struck me in that moment. That not only was it special, it was really special because it was the closing of one door and the opening of another. And so the sacredness of each moment is probably always there. And then we are either tuned into it or not. And I just think that folks that are really spiritual have sort of moved to that place where all those doors are immediately available, and they're always close to that opening into what somebody would call the samadhi, or the magic moment in Hindu. Yeah. So, yeah, that's we use the tone sort of as a reminder of that. And then when we tell our story and we say aho, which is Lakota Sioux language for as it should be, or another way of saying amen, so be it, as it was said, so let it be written, that the tone gives it 10 seconds for that thing to get out into the world. And it's free. Okay, it's free. We let the little baby deer get up and run, and we've given it time to just be what it was. 10 seconds to just witness the birth of that story the way it was, never to be told the same way again, finished, and moving on. That's what those little tones do. And when we added that to the method, to the practice, it really took on a significance. We noticed. We tried sitting in silence for 10 seconds, and that was pretty good. But the tone acted almost like a mantra because it allowed you to connect to all the other times that you successfully sat in silence, and it had a reinforcing quality to it. And we realized that in between the tones there was a lot of silence. Like when I stop talking, there's silence, which is a good thing. So aho.
Yeah, in a way, it's like a classical position. So the tone becomes like a moment of surrender, just
Yeah.
appreciate knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, each cycle of tones is one trip up the mountain and back down. You're back at the same spot, but you're a different person than the one who started up the mountain. Each cycle deepens that awareness and exposure. It's been my experience.
And I do recall some of the work at Vans where we used heuristics to try to put ourselves into a certain mental state. And I'll also add that this discussion has reminded me of one of the most useful things I learned from Van, and that was that our belief systems are acquired in given situations throughout our life, and they're very useful at the moment, but they need to be reconsidered and modified and potentially shelved at other points in our life. Otherwise, they become a drag on us. So for me, the tones that I sometimes go off in my head during the day are just a reset to look at myself and see what's going. And the way that Libby put it was just to ask ourselves continuously, what else could it be? And when I first started doing that, I wasn't getting many answers. But as time went on, every time I asked the question, I got a different answer. What else could it be? So, adaptability for me today.
That connects to Damien's question about what's the procedure. It's sort of doing the work and the repetitions and the habits and norms. What was once exceptional becomes normal, and it changes the way you look at things. In many ways, that life audit theater I described was a really large-scale, 7-day process of cleaning up the temple of self, and trying to, make it more presentable and just do the work that needed to be done that had been neglected maybe, or just periodically, and I knew when it was done at 2:30 in the morning on that Friday when I sort of woke up, absolutely clear, no brain fog from medication, and I knew I was ready to go home. And I had 4 hours before they were going to come and get me. And that was when I shifted into the so what, the action plan going forward. What were the priorities? And that's when I drafted out the 10 books I was going to write and the workshops I was going to complete and things I was going to do for the soccer club and what I was going to do on my terms, teaching for the Army, how I was going to shape that and what I was going to do in my family and with personal relationships and kind of resetting all those, the quality of those relationships. So Yeah, that was that at a grand sort of a grand scale for me. That was that reset and refresh was key. Uh-huh.
I'm a bit curious with Joe. You came about the same word thinking about. I was thinking about the word adapt. And in my mind, when you guys were speaking, I was trying to remember what attracts me to trading. And the best answer I could come up with so far um, is that the fact that the similarity between trading and real life in terms of surviving. So not knowing what would happen next, be surprised, adapt, and move on as fast as you can. So this is how the story is in my head that actually allowed me to reach that word, so adapt. And by coincidence, or maybe not so much, since we're in a very tight circle, you came about also the same word, which is adaptability.
And with respect to both the market and the rest of life, it had popped into my head as the best word to encompass, I guess, what I was thinking throughout this session. So I think you and I were sort of on the same track. I may have been beyond just the markets here, and that's why the human race is dominant, among other things, is our adaptability, and we're going to have to learn to adapt to deal with whatever's coming down the road here.
That is
Great
so
stuff.
true. But I'm gonna leave you guys. I have family calling, duties calling, called lunch.
Yep. Take
So
good care.
we will see you all next week.
Yep.
Take care. Bye bye.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the adaptability reminds me. Robert Gardner used to say, "You don't have to be right. You just can't stay wrong too long." So that whole iterative embracing of the uncertainty and following the voice of the market. That's why I think for me the educational model and frame of reference for trading is so powerful. Not only are we trying to learn how to trade from others, the nature of trading itself is we're trying to learn from the market what's working, what it wants to reward. It's rewarding certain behaviors. And that changes. As people change to its lesson, it teaches a different lesson. So it is a healthy perspective to have a teacher-student relationship with the market. That I, as the student, am trying to learn what the market is teaching me through the voice of price, which has volatility and duration and range. And so those direct measurements of that is how the market is speaking about what it is at that moment. And at the same time, when I'm acting in a certain way, I'm teaching it what I think, and it's responding to that with results too. So there is that learning relationship is a key to survival because it's always got more to teach you. So you don't think you actually understand that whole thing. It's learning. It's the universe is large, and every little part of it is changing, and we're only seeing it from one point of view. So it's got stuff it's working on that we haven't seen yet. So that keeps you humble and careful, cautious but not overly so, and allows you to think about your circle of competence and all that stuff too. So that's why you see me spending time in the theory and practice of learning, adult learning theory, and the biology of that, the psychology of learning, in addition to trading, because I think there's a that works on a number of different levels. I would just share this other story too, that I was the host for a 3-year long story circle that had Mike Three Bears in it, my Lakota Sioux guy. And what we did was we had a word for the week that we were going to think about for the week ahead, and all of us using the same word. And then we would come to the circle and tell a deep, truthful, personal story that illustrated what we thought that word meant for us at some emotional moment in our life, like the word love or duty or responsibility. And so we would think all week, I'd come up with a 2-minute story that encapsulated some moment in my own life where that really came to. So you would think about it all week, and then you come in and you really thought you knew what that word meant. And then you come in and there'd be 10 people in there, each with a powerful personal story about the word duty. And so you would tell your story, aho, and your bowl is empty because it was all in that story and you're ready to listen. And then 9 other stories about what duty means. And you would say, oh my God, I thought I knew something about what the word duty meant until I see all of these other manifestations of it. And then it would surprise you and say, oh, that actually triggers a memory that I hadn't even remembered during that week. But now it's like, oh yeah, that. Or I never even thought of it that way. And you realize that the experiences of our lives are deep and rich and infinite. And we try to collect them into these words that have taken on a certain meaning for us. And sometimes they have multiple meanings. And then we think we know something because of the way that we told that. But it turns out that these power words, if you will, these themes, connect all of these different parts of our stories of life, which is how we remember and which is how we decide. And they were always embodied in a certain place and time, and yet it carries forward into the future and shapes what we believe and what we think is possible or not possible. And then you realize that by gently tweaking those, you can re-story and reimagine and revisit and live forward in a fresh way, unencumbered by those entanglements if you choose to do so. What Libby gets to about, the freedom to transform, which Van talked about is, transform yourself by changing your beliefs. For me, that life audit process was about, life theater, was about sort of tracing those things in a formal, systematic way and having it on that living display. That living story mosaic or tapestry, for me, really is a living story that every day as I reflect on it, this thing is, and I realize how much is changing and yet how much remains the same. The underlying piece that is changeless and the thing that is always changing. The Jains talk about that. The Yin Yang talks about that. That's the exciting part of these stories. So yeah, your insight about the 2 words that came up coincidentally, yeah, it's the coincidences. We just don't know what the connection was yet. Is my hypothesis. But what we do on Saturday mornings is we have a story circle where we just do works in progress. So we got away from the everybody thinking about the same word and what does it mean, and then tried story circles where it was whatever your work in progress on for yourself is, come in and tell us what's going on that's most important, which has a different flavor to it, but it's still a true story circle, and it's really kind of interesting in that sense. So the only thing we don't do on Saturdays is talk about trading, because there's guys in there that are not traders, some that are, but we want to somehow try to get beyond this madness, which is trading, thinking about trading all the time. So there's that kind of thing. So anyway, I'll hold to that. And I got about 10 more minutes. I see my wife is pointing at the clock, and
Hey
I
guys,
think
I'm
we're
gonna
going to
say
do a
goodbye.
brunch. Yeah.
Too. Thank you.
Yeah.
all.
So, and I'm gonna hang this recording as an artifact, in that course, just to say that's who we were and that's what we said, and that was and that's all it had to be. It was, that perfect moment for 90 minutes or whatever that we shared. So, I want to just thank you guys. Grateful for the opportunity to spend the time of our life together, and I forgive ourselves. We forgive ourselves for the stories we told and that we've lived, and that we're going to just try our best to keep getting better. So, take good care, and
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
we'll see you on down the road, fellas.
Thank you very much.